"Dad." Ethan's crying again. Martha, the housekeeper's voice echoed through the intercom, cutting through the office silence like a knife. Andrew Vance looked up from the spreadsheets that covered his entire mahogany desk. His son's crying reached him even there, muffled by the mansion's thick walls but still piercing. 6 years. 6 years since Ethan was born and took with him the only person Andrew had never been able to replace. 6 years trying to decipher an enigma that hurt too much to face. "Call the caregiver," Andrew replied, pressing the intercom button harder than necessary. "She left yesterday, sir. That's the 3rd this month." Andrew closed his eyes. Spreadsheets, he understood. Numbers made sense. Deadlines were met. Goals were achieved. His high-end grocery chain, Vance Select Markets, ran like a well-oiled machine, every cog in its place. But here, in the house he had built to be a home and which had become a labyrinth of silences, he felt completely lost. The crying intensified. Andrew knew that sound. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't sleep. It was the frustration of a child trying to communicate in a language no one around him could understand. It was the silent cry of someone living imprisoned in his own world, observing through the bars of a place others called different. "Sir?" Martha insisted on the intercom. Andrew stood up, adjusted his impeccable suit, and walked to the office window. Down below, in the perfectly manicured garden, he could see the swing set he had installed when Ethan turned 4. It had never been used. Everything in that house seemed to have been designed for a child who didn't exist. A child who spoke, who ran to him asking to be picked up, who called him Daddy, as naturally as he breathed. Ethan existed, of course. He was real. He was his son. He had Eleanor's same brown eyes. But he lived in a parallel dimension, a private universe where the rules were different, and Andrew possessed neither map nor compass to navigate. "Post a new ad," Andrew said, returning to the intercom. "I need someone by tomorrow. What kind of profile do you prefer this time?" Andrew hesitated. They had tried everything. Specialized educators, occupational therapists, pediatric nurses. They all arrived with theories, methods, and schedules. They all left frustrated, defeated by a 6-year-old boy who communicated only through screams, silences, and a gaze that seemed to see beyond what everyone else could perceive. "Someone," he began, but his voice failed. How to explain that he needed someone capable of translating a language that he himself, the father, couldn't understand? Someone with patience, much more patience than I have. The crying suddenly ceased. Andrew knew that pattern too. Ethan had tired of trying and would now retreat into his inner world, where no one could hurt him with impossible expectations. Andrew returned to his desk, but the spreadsheets seemed blurred. The numbers danced on the screen, making no sense. For the first time in a long time, he wondered if building walls around his heart had truly been the best strategy to protect what remained of his family. Outside, the swing set swayed empty in the afternoon breeze like an unaccepted invitation to a conversation that never happened. Chloe Hayes adjusted her simple blouse for the 3rd time before ringing the doorbell. The wrought iron gate stood before her like a barrier between two worlds, hers made of townhouses and small backyards, and that one, where even the garden seemed to have been designed by someone who had never stepped on dirt. 24 years old, high school graduate, previous experience limited to babysitting the neighbor's children on weekends. Not exactly the profile a family like that usually looked for, but the ad said urgent, and Chloe needed work. "Chloe Hayes?" Martha's voice echoed through the intercom. "Yes, ma'am. I'm here about the nanny position." The gate opened with an electronic hum. Chloe walked up the cobblestone driveway, observing the house's enormous windows. Some of them hid a child who needed care, but the place seemed too silent, as if the very architecture muffled any sound of life. Martha greeted her at the door, a woman in her 50s, hair pulled back in an impeccable bun, starched white apron. Her eyes scanned Chloe from head to toe, cataloging every detail with the precision of someone evaluating if a product was worthy of the shelf. "Mr. Vance is in a meeting, but I can do a first screening," Martha said, leading Chloe to a living room that looked like it belonged in a decorating magazine. "Experience with special needs children?" Chloe hesitated. Special needs. The word sounded clinical, distant. "Not formally, but I grew up caring for kids in the neighborhood. My dad always said a kid is a kid, regardless of, well, Anything. This isn't just anything, Martha retorted, writing something on a notepad. Ethan has autism. He doesn't speak. He has meltdowns. He needs a strict routine, specific methods. We've had educators, therapists, qualified people who couldn't handle him. Chloe felt the weight of the comparison. She had no diplomas on the wall. She didn't know methods. She wasn't even sure what autism was beyond what she'd heard in casual conversations. But something in the way Martha spoke, as if the child were a problem to be managed, stirred something in her. "Can I meet him?" she asked. Martha seemed surprised. "Meet him? He doesn't interact. He stays in his room, usually. Plays alone, when he plays. Even so, I'd like to see him." After a brief hesitation, Martha led her down the hallway. The walls were decorated with abstract paintings and family photos. A young Andrew, a beautiful woman beside him, but no recent photos of Ethan. It was as if the child were a ghost in his own home. They stopped in front of a slightly ajar door. "Ethan?" Martha knocked lightly. "Someone's here to meet you." Chloe peeked through the crack. A small boy was sitting on the floor surrounded by toy cars organized in perfect rows. Messy brown hair, eyes focused on a world only he could see. He moved the cars back and forth, following a pattern that made sense only to him. "He does that all day," Martha murmured. "Organizes and reorganizes. Doesn't let anyone touch them." Chloe watched for a few more seconds. Ethan didn't look up, but something in his movements wasn't mechanical. There was intention there, a logic of his own. It seemed less like obsessive behavior and more a dance, as if he were telling a story no one else knew how to listen to. "Can I go in?" she asked. "It's not recommended, he might get agitated." But Chloe was already gently pushing the door open. She entered the room and sat on the floor, at a respectful distance. Ethan continued moving the cars, but she noticed a slight change in his rhythm. He knew he wasn't alone anymore. Chloe didn't speak, didn't try to touch the toys, did nothing but observe. After a few minutes, she took a coin from her pocket and began rolling it on the floor in smooth circles. Not towards Ethan, just close enough to enter his peripheral vision. The coin rolled, gleaming under the window light. Ethan stopped moving the cars for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Chloe to realize he had noticed. "Chloe?" Martha called from the door impatiently. Chloe slowly stood up, put the coin away, and left the room. When she turned to close the door, she saw Ethan looking at the spot where the coin had rolled. Only for an instant, but it was enough. "I suppose you two got along," Martha said, but the tone was more of surprise than approval. Chloe smiled. Something had happened in that room. Something small, almost imperceptible, but real. Ethan hadn't spoken, hadn't smiled, hadn't approached. But for a second, they had shared the same space without either of them needing to protect themselves. "When can I start?" she asked. Martha studied her for a long moment. "Mr. Vance will want to interview you personally, but I must warn you, this is not an easy job. Many people have tried and failed." "Maybe they tried to fix what wasn't broken," Chloe replied, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. For the first time, Martha was speechless. Andrew arrived home at 7 in the evening, carrying the exhaustion of another day trying to control the uncontrollable. 3 delayed suppliers, 2 managers resigning, and a meeting with investors that dragged on beyond all reasonable limits. But none of that compared to the weight of knowing that upon opening the door, he would again find the silence that screamed louder than any corporate conflict. "Mr. Vance?" Martha intercepted him in the hall. "The candidate for the position is in the living room, Chloe Hayes." Andrew checked his watch. He had completely forgotten about the interview. "How did she do with Ethan?" Martha hesitated, and Andrew knew that hesitation. It meant something had happened, something she didn't quite know how to categorize. She was in the room with him for a few minutes. There were no incidents. Incidents? He didn't scream, he didn't get agitated. In fact, he was quieter than usual. Andrew frowned. Ethan being quieter usually meant Ethan was more withdrawn, more distant. It wasn't necessarily good news. He found Chloe in the living room, flipping through an architecture magazine with the genuine curiosity of someone seeing that kind of luxury for the first time. She stood up when he entered, smoothing her simple skirt with her hands. "Mr. Vance?" "Chloe Hayes. Thank you for seeing me." Andrew quickly studied her. Young, probably younger than the other candidates. Simple but clean clothes. Upright posture, direct gaze. No ostentatious diplomas in her hands. No folder full of references and certificates. "Please sit down," he said, settling into the armchair opposite. "Martha told me you don't have specific experience with autistic children." "That's true, but I have experience with children and I imagine that's a good start." Her frankness disarmed him. The other candidates always started with a list of qualifications, revolutionary methods they would apply, theories about child development. Chloe simply admitted her limitations as if they were a fact, not a disadvantage. "Ethan is," Andrew began, then stopped. How to explain his own son to a stranger? He's a complex child. He doesn't speak, has interaction difficulties, needs very specific routines. We've tried several different approaches. What worked? The question caught Andrew off guard. "What do you mean? Of the approaches you've tried, which one worked best? What made Ethan most comfortable?" Andrew realized he had never thought about it that way. He had always focused on what didn't work, on the methods that failed, on the caregivers who gave up. He had never asked himself what actually made Ethan feel good. I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe when he's alone, organizing his toys. He seems calmer that way." "How does he organize them?" "Rows. Always rows. Cars, blocks, anything he finds. Martha says it's obsessive behavior, that we should discourage it." Chloe tilted her head, thoughtful. What if it's not obsession? What if it's just his way of making sense of things? Andrew stared at her. None of the other candidates had questioned the opinions of Martha or the specialists who had passed through. All accepted the diagnoses and labels as absolute truths. "Do you have children?" he asked. "No, but my dad raised me alone after my mom died. He always said children don't come with instruction manuals, that each one has their own way of understanding the world." Andrew felt an unexpected pang of identification. He too was raising Ethan alone, also dealing with the absence of a mother, also had no instruction manual. But unlike Chloe's father, he had outsourced that responsibility, delegated to specialists and caregivers the task of deciphering his own son. "Martha said you were in the room with him. How was it?" "I didn't do anything," Chloe replied simply. "I just stayed there. I watched him play, tried to understand the logic of what he was doing. I didn't try to change anything. I didn't try to make him interact. I just was present." "And you think that's enough?" "I think it's the first step. How can you help someone if you don't know who that person really is?" The question echoed in the room's silence. Andrew realized that in 6 years, he had never asked himself that question about Ethan. He knew his diagnosis, his limitations, his medical needs. But who was Ethan as a person? What made him happy, besides the compulsive organization of his toys? What did he like beyond rigid routines? "When can you start?" he asked, surprising himself. Chloe smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Andrew had seen in that house in a long time. "Whenever you need me. I need you to understand," Andrew continued, returning to the formal tone that protected him from excessive expectations. "Ethan is not an ordinary child. Weeks can pass without any visible progress. Many people get frustrated, give up. Mr. Vance." Chloe leaned forward, her eyes shining with a soft determination. "I didn't come here to fix Ethan. I came to get to know him. If that's not enough for you, that's okay. But it's all I can offer. Time, patience, and a willingness to learn who he truly is." Andrew felt something stir in his chest, something that had been dormant for a long time. For the first time, someone spoke of Ethan as a person to be known, not as a problem to be solved. From upstairs came the familiar sound of cars being dragged across the floor. Ethan was awake, reorganizing his world into perfect rows. But this time, Andrew didn't just hear the repetitive noise. He heard something that could be music if he knew how to listen. Chloe arrived on Monday carrying a worn canvas bag and the nervousness of someone about to dive into unknown waters. Martha greeted her with precise instructions: meal times, bath routine, medications, permitted activities, and, especially, what to avoid. "No sudden changes to the routine," Martha emphasized, handing her a typed list. "No excessive noise, and especially don't try to force interaction." When Ethan withdraws, it's best to leave him alone. Chloe nodded but put the list in her pocket without reading it. Theory was one thing. Practice would be something completely different. Ethan was in his usual spot, sitting on the floor of his room, surrounded by cars organized in rows. Chloe gently knocked on the door and entered, sitting on the rug at a respectful distance. "Hi, Ethan. I'm Chloe. I'm going to be with you today." No reaction. Ethan continued moving the cars, creating patterns only he understood. Chloe took a small, colorful rubber ball from her bag. Nothing too different from the coin the day before, but something that could roll and bounce. She began bouncing it gently against the wall, creating a regular rhythm. She didn't direct it at Ethan, didn't invade his space, just established a new music in the environment. Thump, thump, thump. After a few minutes, she noticed that Ethan had synchronized the movement of his cars with the sound of the ball. He didn't stop playing, but now he followed the rhythm she had created. "Do you like music?" she asked, continuing to bounce the ball. Ethan didn't answer, but when she varied the rhythm, he followed. When she made 2 quick bounces followed by a pause, the cars followed the same pattern. Chloe smiled. It was a conversation. Different from any conversation she knew, but definitely an exchange. At lunchtime, Martha appeared with a carefully prepared plate. "He only eats with the blue spoon," she explained, "and the foods can't touch on the plate." Chloe watched Ethan examine the plate, separating the foods even further, creating small territories of different colors. When he realized she was looking, he stopped and lowered his head. "It's looking nice," Chloe commented. "Like a drawing." Ethan looked up for a fraction of a second. It wasn't much, but it was something. In the afternoon, when the sun streamed through the bedroom window, Chloe took an old jump rope from her bag. "My dad taught me to play with this when I was little," she said, starting to jump slowly. "But you can do other things with it too." She laid the rope on the floor, forming circles and waves. Ethan stopped playing with his cars and watched. Chloe picked up some of the cars and placed them along the rope's line, creating a curved road. For a moment, she thought she had invaded his space, broken some important rule. But Ethan approached and continued the game, picking up more cars and following the road she had created. He didn't speak, didn't smile, didn't make eye contact, but he played along. When Andrew arrived home, he found Chloe in the garden, observing the yard with interest. "How was the first day?" he asked. "Different than I expected," she replied. "Better." "Was Ethan difficult?" "Ethan taught," Chloe smiled. "He has his own way of doing things, but it's not hard to understand once you stop and observe. It's like he has his own language. He just needs someone willing to learn it." Andrew looked at the yard too. The swing set still swayed empty, but the space seemed different, less abandoned. "Martha said you played together. He let me participate in his game. It's different." "And you think that—" Andrew hesitated. "You think it might work?" Chloe looked at him. In her eyes, Andrew saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. Hope without illusions. "I don't know if I can make Ethan different from who he is, but I can try to understand who he truly is. If that's enough for you, I'd like to keep trying." That night, Andrew went up to Ethan's room to say goodnight. He found the boy asleep, but the cars were no longer organized in rigid rows. They were scattered across the floor, following the outline of a rope that formed paths and curves. For the first time, Ethan's room looked like a child's room that was played in. 2 weeks later, Chloe knew every corner of the house, except the shed at the back of the yard. Martha had vaguely mentioned that old things Mr. Vance doesn't use anymore were kept there, but never specified what. Ethan was going through a difficult period. 3 days of rain had left him agitated, unable to maintain his usual routines. He spent hours reorganizing the same cars, growing more frustrated when they didn't stay exactly as he wanted. On Thursday morning, after a particularly intense meltdown, where Ethan threw all his toys on the floor and refused to eat, Chloe decided to explore alternatives. "Can I see what's in the shed?" she asked Martha. "What for? There's nothing useful in there. Just curious. Maybe there's something that might interest Ethan." Martha sighed, handing her the key. "Just don't touch anything without asking first." The shed smelled of mold and stored memories. Boxes labeled Eleanor clothes, Eleanor books, old documents. Chloe felt a pang in her chest, realizing that here was the life of someone who no longer existed, carefully archived as if it could be retrieved someday. In the back, covered by a dusty sheet, she found a ping-pong table. Chloe carefully pulled back the sheet. The table was in good condition, just dusty. The paddles were in a box beside it, along with some yellowed old balls. On the side of the table, a golden plaque read, "To Andrew, with love, Eleanor. May our life always be a game we both win." Something stirred within her. It wasn't just an abandoned ping-pong table. It was a symbol of a lost connection, a game left without players. But perhaps new players could be found. Chloe spent the rest of the morning cleaning every inch of the table. She stretched the net, cleaned the paddles, tested the surface's bounce. When she finished, the table looked new. She picked up a ball and let it bounce a few times, observing the sound it made, the regular rhythm of the bounce. It was hypnotic, rhythmic, predictable, exactly the kind of thing Ethan might like. When it was time to get Ethan for lunch, she found him still irritated, sitting in a corner of his room with his arms crossed. The cars remained scattered on the floor, abandoned. "Do you want to come see something with me?" she asked. Ethan didn't answer, but when she held out her hand, he took it. They walked together to the shed, where the table now occupied the center of the space, illuminated by the light coming through the small windows. Chloe picked up a ball and dropped it on the table. The sound echoed through the shed, a soft, regular plink. Ethan stopped and watched the ball bounce. She picked up a paddle and began hitting the ball against the table, creating a constant rhythm. Plink, plink, plink. The same kind of repetition Ethan so appreciated with his cars, but amplified, richer in sounds. Ethan approached the table. He touched the surface with his fingertips, feeling the vibration. Chloe stopped hitting and offered him the paddle. He hesitated, then took the paddle carefully. It was too heavy for his small hands, but he managed to hold it. Chloe dropped the ball on the table, and Ethan tried to hit it. He missed. Tried again. Missed again. On the third try, the paddle touched the ball. It wasn't a perfect hit, but it was contact. The sound was different, sharper, and Ethan smiled. It was a small, almost imperceptible smile, but it was the first smile Chloe saw on his face. "Want to try again?" she asked. For the next hour, Ethan tried to hit the ball. Most attempts failed, but some succeeded. With each hit, he became more focused, more determined. It wasn't just a game for him. It was a dialogue. The ball was the question, the paddle was the answer. And for the first time, Ethan was able to answer. When Martha came to find them for lunch, she found them both in the shed, Ethan holding the paddle and watching Chloe hit the ball against the table. "What are you doing here?" she asked, clearly uncomfortable. "Playing," Chloe replied simply. "With Mrs. Eleanor's things? Mr. Vance won't like this." Chloe looked at Ethan, who still held the paddle as if it were a treasure. "Then let's ask him." Andrew arrived home earlier that Thursday, carrying the tension of a meeting that hadn't gone as planned. He found Martha in the hall, visibly distraught. "Mr. Vance, I need to speak with you about Chloe. Did something happen with Ethan?" "She touched Mrs. Eleanor's things. She took the ping-pong table you stored in the shed." Andrew felt the air leave his lungs. The table. Eleanor had given him that table for their first wedding anniversary, when they still lived in the small apartment. They played almost every night after dinner, laughing until the neighbors complained about the noise. Where is it now? In the shed, with Ethan. Andrew walked across the yard with quick steps, each one echoing the irritation growing in his chest. It wasn't just about touching his things. It was about stirring up memories he had carefully buried, about touching wounds that hadn't yet healed. He stopped at the shed door and heard the unmistakable sound of the ball hitting the table. Plink, plink, plink. The same rhythm that used to fill his nights with Eleanor, now echoing in a space that should have been silent. He pushed the door open and found a scene that left him speechless. Ethan was standing beside the table, holding a paddle that was too big for his hands. Chloe was on the other side, gently hitting the ball towards him. When Ethan managed to make contact, even if the ball flew off the table, Chloe smiled as if he had just won a championship. And Ethan was focused, concentrated, present in a way Andrew had never seen. "Chloe," he said, his voice harsher than he intended. She turned, and Andrew saw the exact moment when joy turned into apprehension in her eyes. Mr. Vance, I can explain. It's not necessary, Andrew cut in, entering the shed. Martha has already told me everything. Ethan didn't drop the paddle, but stopped trying to hit. He stood there, as if sensing the tension in the air. I should have asked first, Chloe began. It was an invasion of privacy, I know. But Ethan was having a difficult day, and when I saw the table— This table was stored for a reason, Andrew interrupted. They're not toys. They were personal things. Chloe lowered the paddle, clearly embarrassed. I'm so sorry. I didn't think— Exactly. You didn't think. The silence that followed was broken by an unexpected sound. Ethan tapped the paddle on the table once. Then again. He wasn't trying to hit anything. He was calling attention. Andrew looked at him. In his son's eyes, there was something he had never seen before. Determination. Ethan wanted to keep playing. He likes it, Chloe said softly. In the last 3 days since we started playing here, he's had fewer meltdowns, he eats better, he sleeps better. It's like he's found something that makes sense to him. Andrew watched Ethan holding the paddle. The boy wasn't looking at him, but his whole posture screamed a clear message. Don't take this away from me. This table, Andrew began, his voice faltering. Eleanor gave me this table. I saw the plaque, Chloe replied. It must have been very special to you. It was. Ethan placed the paddle on the table and walked over to Andrew. He didn't touch him, didn't speak, but just stood there beside him, looking at the table as if he understood that it was important. Andrew closed his eyes for a moment. He could hear Eleanor laughing, could smell her perfume mixed with sweat after an intense game. He could remember the promise they made to each other, that they would always find ways to play together no matter what life brought. Eleanor was dead, but Ethan was alive, and for the first time in 6 years, he was truly present. Do you know how to play? He asked Chloe. Not very well. My dad taught me the basics when I was a kid. Andrew picked up the paddle Ethan had left. It was lighter than he remembered, but still familiar in his hands. Eleanor always said that ping pong isn't about winning, he said, dropping the ball on the table. It's about keeping the conversation going. The longer the ball stays on the table, the better the conversation. He gently hit it to Chloe, who returned it carefully. Ethan watched the exchange, fascinated. She left the table to be used, Andrew continued, hitting it again, not to be stored away. Ethan approached the table and touched the surface, feeling the ball's vibration. Want to try, Ethan? Andrew asked, offering him the paddle. For the first time, Ethan looked directly into his father's eyes, and Andrew saw there not only his son but also a bit of Eleanor, the same determination, the same willingness to play. The following weeks brought a routine Andrew had never imagined possible. He would arrive home and hear the familiar sound of the ball echoing through the yard. He would find Ethan in the shed with Chloe, focused on hitting, each day with a little more precision. Ethan still didn't speak, but he had started communicating in other ways. He pointed to the table when he wanted to play. He shook his head when he didn't want to stop. He smiled, truly smiled, when he managed a sequence of hits. Andrew started coming home earlier, just to watch. Seeing Ethan focused, present, almost happy, awakened something in him that had been dormant for years. But Martha wasn't comfortable with the changes. He's becoming dependent on this game, she commented one afternoon, watching Ethan refuse dinner because he wanted to keep playing. This isn't healthy. It's turning into another obsession. He's evolving, Chloe countered. Look how he concentrates, how he follows the ball. That's motor development, cognitive development. You're not a therapist, Martha cut in. You can't determine what's development or obsession. The tension had been building for days. Martha felt threatened by the closeness between Chloe and Ethan, by the way the boy looked for the caregiver when he woke up, by the way he obeyed her without resistance. The final straw came on a Friday night. Andrew had gone out for a business meeting that ran longer than expected. Chloe was alone with Ethan when he had one of the worst meltdowns she had ever witnessed. It started at dinner. Ethan noticed the peas were touching the mashed potatoes, something Martha usually carefully avoided. He pushed the plate away, started screaming, threw himself on the floor. Chloe tried to calm him, but the meltdown escalated. Ethan hit his head on the floor, screamed incessantly, thrashed as if fighting invisible enemies. Martha appeared in the kitchen. See? Your method doesn't work when he's truly agitated. He just needs time, Chloe said, kneeling beside Ethan. Time? He'll hurt himself. But instead of trying to restrain him or apply traditional techniques, Chloe did something completely different. She threw herself on the floor next to Ethan. She began imitating his movements. When he flapped his arms, she flapped her arms. When he screamed, she made similar sounds. She didn't try to stop him, didn't try to calm him. She simply entered the meltdown with him. "What are you doing?" Martha asked, horrified. Chloe didn't answer. She was completely focused on Ethan, following his rhythm, his intensity. After a few minutes, she took a ping-pong ball from her pocket and began bouncing it on the floor. The regular sound of the ball cut through the chaos. Ethan stopped screaming and looked at the ball. Chloe continued, creating a constant, hypnotic rhythm. Slowly, very slowly, Ethan stopped thrashing. He sat on the floor watching the ball bounce. Chloe held out the ball to him. With still trembling hands, he took it. "Want to go play?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. They walked together to the shed. Ethan held the paddle with excessive force at first, still agitated. But as they played, the tension left his body. The rhythm of the ball calmed him, focused him, brought him back. When Andrew arrived home an hour later, he found Martha waiting in the living room, clearly disturbed. Did something happen? Ethan had a terrible meltdown. And Chloe, she did things I don't understand. She threw herself on the floor with him, encouraged disruptive behavior. Andrew frowned. "Where are they now?" "In the shed, playing as if nothing happened." Andrew walked to the yard. Through the shed window, he could see Ethan and Chloe playing peacefully. Ethan seemed calm, focused. There were no signs of the meltdown that supposedly happened. "How did she manage to calm him?" he asked when he returned. Martha hesitated. "I don't know. But Mr. Vance, you need to think about what's best for Ethan. Chloe doesn't have training. She doesn't understand the protocols. She's confusing things." Andrew looked out the window again. Ethan was smiling. "Martha," he said finally, "you've worked here for over 10 years. How many times did you see Ethan smile before Chloe arrived?" Martha was silent. "How many times did he look for me when I came home? How many times did he show interest in anything other than his cars organized in rows?" "Mr. Vance, she may not have training, Martha, but she has something all the others didn't. She sees Ethan as he is, not as he should be." That night, Andrew stood watching from the window for a long time, seeing his son play ping-pong with a young woman who had appeared out of nowhere and changed everything. The following Monday, Martha found Andrew in his office before he left for work. "Mr. Vance, I must insist on the matter of Chloe. I spoke with Ethan's former pediatrician, Dr. Evelyn Stone. She said unconventional methods can confuse autistic children, create false expectations." Andrew paused in the middle of putting documents in his briefcase. What kind of false expectations? Ethan might be getting too attached to Chloe, creating dependence. And these progresses she says she's seeing might just be coincidental. Autistic children have periods of improvement that don't necessarily indicate real evolution. Martha's words echoed in Andrew's mind all morning. At the board meeting, while discussing market expansion, he found himself thinking about Ethan. Were the smiles real? Was the interest in ping-pong genuine development, or just a new fixation? In the afternoon, Martha called the office. "Mr. Vance, Ethan is having another episode. Chloe can't control him. Perhaps it's time to reconsider specialized professionals." Andrew canceled the rest of his meetings and rushed home. He found Martha in the hall, clearly distraught, and Chloe in the yard with Ethan, who seemed agitated but not in a meltdown. "What happened?" "He broke 2 plates at lunch," Martha explained. "When Chloe tried to calm him, he got more agitated. I had to intervene." Andrew watched Chloe trying to engage Ethan with the ping-pong ball, but the boy pulled away, restless. "Chloe, can I speak with you?" They moved to the office. Chloe looked tired, frustrated. "I don't know what happened today," she began. Ethan woke up differently, agitated. Nothing that worked before was working. "Martha thinks you might be forcing situations that aren't natural for him." Chloe seemed surprised. "Forcing? I never forced anything. I always followed his rhythm. But perhaps you're creating expectations." Maybe he's feeling pressured to conform. Mr. Vance? Chloe leaned forward, her eyes shining with something between frustration and despair. Ethan isn't pressured. He's discovering things about himself. He has bad days like anyone else. Andrew hesitated. The doubt Martha had planted grew like a weed. I think we need to take a break. A few days to assess the situation. The silence that followed was deafening. Are you letting me go? I'm asking for a break, to think about what's best for Ethan. Chloe swallowed hard. Andrew saw the exact moment the wound opened. I understand, she said, her voice too controlled. How long? A week. Maybe 2. Chloe nodded, picked up her bag and walked to the door. She stopped in the doorway. Mr. Vance, can I ask you something? When you hire the next caregiver, ask her to pay attention to what Ethan is trying to say, not what she thinks he should say. After Chloe left, Andrew hired 2 new caregivers recommended by Dr. Evelyn Stone. The first, Brenda, had a specialization in autism and arrived with a folder full of exercises and schedules. The second, Diane, was an occupational therapist with 15 years of experience. On the first day without Chloe, Ethan looked for her. He walked to the shed, picked up the paddle, stood by the table waiting. When Martha explained that Chloe wouldn't be coming anymore, he dropped the paddle on the floor and left. Brenda tried to engage him with structured activities. Ethan retreated to his room. Diane tried sensory exercises. Ethan cried for the first time in weeks. On the 3rd day, he stopped eating properly. On the 4th day, he returned to organizing his cars in obsessive rows. On the 5th day, he had a meltdown that lasted 2 hours. He's going through an adjustment period, Brenda explained to Andrew. It's normal when there are caregiver changes. He needs time to accept new authorities. But Andrew watched Ethan and saw something different. It wasn't resistance to change, it was grief. His son was grieving for someone who had disappeared from his life without explanation. On Friday night, Andrew found Ethan in the shed, sitting next to the ping-pong table holding a ball. He wasn't playing, just holding it as if it were a talisman. Ethan? Andrew approached cautiously. The boy looked at him with eyes that seemed to ask, "Where is she?" Andrew sat on the floor next to his son. For the first time, he realized that Ethan wasn't just missing Chloe. He was missing the version of himself he had discovered in her presence. "Do you want her to come back?" he asked. Ethan didn't answer with words, but he held out the ball towards Andrew, like a silent plea. Andrew spent the entire weekend watching Ethan decline. The boy didn't leave his room, didn't touch his toys, ate only when absolutely necessary. The 2 specialized caregivers tried everything: colorful schedules, sensory exercises, behavioral techniques, but Ethan treated them like ghosts. On Monday morning, Andrew made a decision he should have made days ago. "Martha, I need Chloe's phone number." "Mr. Vance, I don't think that's the number, Martha." Martha hesitated, then wrote the number on a piece of paper. Andrew called immediately. "Chloe? It's Andrew Vance. Can I see you today?" On the other end of the line, a long pause. "To talk about Ethan? To apologize? And to offer you your job back, if you still want it." Another pause. "Mr. Vance, I don't know if..." "Chloe, my son has been slowly dying since you left. Not physically, but something inside him has gone out. I need you to come back. Can I think about it?" "Of course. But don't take too long. Please." Andrew hung up and found Martha standing at the office door. "Are you sure about this, sir?" "More sure than I've been about anything in a long time." "And the specialized caregivers?" "They can leave today." That afternoon, Andrew arrived home and found Brenda packing. "Mr. Vance, I must inform you that I have never seen a child so resistant to proven techniques. Ethan clearly needs more intensive intervention, perhaps even medication." Andrew looked at Ethan, who was sitting in a corner of his room, his back to everyone, playing with his cars without real interest. "Thank you for your services, Brenda. Martha can arrange payment." After the 2 caregivers left, Andrew went up to Ethan's room. He sat on the floor beside his son. "Remember Chloe?" he asked. Ethan stopped moving his cars but didn't turn around. I made a mistake letting her go. I thought I was protecting you, but I was actually protecting myself. I'm afraid to get attached to people, to lose someone important again." Ethan turned slightly, enough for Andrew to see his profile. Would you like her to come back? Ethan nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Then I need your help. I need you to help me convince her. Andrew left and returned with paper and a pen. He sat next to Ethan again. I'm going to write her a letter, but I want you to draw something. It can be anything you want to tell her. Ethan picked up the pencil with hesitation. For a long time, he just sat there, looking at the blank paper. Then, slowly, he began to draw. First he drew a circle, then another, and another. They weren't just circles, they were balls. A row of balls that seemed to be in motion as if they were bouncing. When he finished, Andrew wrote in the letter, Chloe, we miss you. Ethan isn't the same without you. I'm not the same without seeing my son smile. Please come back. Andrew and Ethan. The next day, Andrew went personally to Chloe's house. It was a simple house in a modest residential neighborhood, with a small backyard where traces of a creative childhood could still be seen. Ball marks on the wall, a makeshift target made of cans. Chloe received him on the porch. She looked tired, thinner. How's Ethan? Lost, Andrew replied with brutal honesty. Like me. He handed her the letter and the drawing. Chloe read in silence, then looked at the drawing for a long time. He drew balls, she murmured. I think it's his language to say he misses you. Chloe folded the paper carefully. Mr. Vance, when you let me go, you said you were thinking about what was best for Ethan. What changed? Andrew took a deep breath. I realized I was thinking about what was easiest for me. You challenged everything I thought I knew about my son. You made me question if I really knew him. That scared me. And now I know I'd rather be challenged than see my son decline. I'd rather not understand some things than pretend I understand everything. Chloe was silent for a long moment. I need guarantees. I can't come back if there's a possibility of being dismissed again at the first difficulty. You have complete autonomy. And Chloe, you're no longer a nanny. You're Ethan's full-time caregiver, on full-time payroll with benefits, a fair salary, and the recognition you should have received from the start. Chloe smiled for the first time since Andrew had arrived. Can I start tomorrow? You can start now if you want. That afternoon, when they arrived home, Ethan was in the shed, sitting next to the empty ping-pong table. Upon seeing Chloe, he didn't run to her, didn't shout with joy, but he picked up a ball and held it out to her. Want to play? She asked. For the first time in a week, Ethan smiled. The following months brought a transformation Andrew had never imagined possible. Chloe returned not just as a caregiver, but as part of the family. Ethan blossomed in ways that surprised everyone every day. Ping pong became more than a game. It was the language through which Ethan communicated with the world. When he was happy, he played with accelerated rhythm. When sad, the hits were slow, deliberate. When he wanted attention, he let the ball roll until it stopped and looked at whoever was nearby. But the biggest surprise came on a Tuesday afternoon, when Andrew arrived home and heard something impossible coming from the shed. More, a small, clear voice said. More. Andrew ran there and found Ethan holding the paddle, looking at Chloe. More, he repeated, hitting the paddle on the table. You want to play more? Chloe asked, her eyes shining. More, Ethan confirmed, and it was the most beautiful word Andrew had ever heard. From that day on, Ethan began to use simple words. Not complex conversations, but words with intention. Water when he was thirsty. Ball when he wanted to play. No when something bothered him. Andrew started participating in the ping-pong sessions. At first, Ethan rejected him, preferring to play only with Chloe. But gradually, with her infinite patience, he began to accept his father playing too. Slowly, Chloe instructed Andrew. Let him control the rhythm. If you go too fast, he'll get frustrated. Andrew learned that playing with Ethan was completely different from playing with Eleanor. With Eleanor, it was competition, fun, conquest. With Ethan, it was pure communication. Each hit was a question. Each return was an answer. When Ethan turned 8, Chloe suggested something that made Andrew apprehensive. I think he's ready to meet other children. There's a youth table tennis tournament at the local community sports club, beginner category. Do you think he could handle other people, noise, a crowd? I think he's ready to try, and if he can't, we'll leave. Simple as that. Andrew hesitated. The idea of exposing Ethan to an unfamiliar environment, full of strangers, terrified him. What if he had a meltdown? What if the other children didn't understand? Does he want to participate? He finally asked. Why don't you ask him? That night, Andrew found Ethan in the shed, as always, playing with Chloe. Ethan, would you like to play ping pong with other children? Ethan stopped in the middle of a hit and looked at his father. Where? At a club, with lots of kids who also like to play. Ethan was silent for a long moment, processing. Chloe going? Of course, Chloe replied. I'll be there the whole time. Dad going? Andrew felt his heart tighten. It was the first time Ethan had called him Dad directly. If you want me to go. Ethan nodded. Want. The tournament was a transformative experience. Ethan was initially overwhelmed by the noise and the number of people, but Chloe took him to a quiet corner with a ball, letting him calm down at his own pace. When it was his turn to play, something magical happened. The boy on the other side of the table was his age, also shy, also learning. Ethan didn't see a competitor. He saw another player willing to keep the ball conversation going. The match lasted 15 minutes. Ethan lost, but he didn't care. When it was over, he walked up to the other boy and held out his hand. Good game, he said, repeating a phrase Chloe had taught him. Andrew was crying when Ethan returned to him. Dad sad? No, son. Dad is proud. It was the first time Andrew had called Ethan's son out loud. On the way back home, Ethan slept in the back seat of the car. Andrew looked in the rearview mirror, still unable to believe what he had witnessed. How did you know? He asked Chloe. How did you know he was ready? I didn't know, she replied. But I trusted him. We trusted that he would tell us if it was too much. What if it had gone wrong? Then we'd try again another day. There's no schedule for growing up, Mr. Vance. There's just a willingness to try. That night, Ethan asked to play ping pong with his dad before bed. For the first time, it wasn't Chloe mediating the interaction. It was just father and son, a ball, and 2 paddles. Andrew hit softly. Ethan returned. Andrew hit again. Ethan returned. Thank you, Ethan said suddenly. For what, son? For playing with me. Andrew stopped the ball and knelt down to Ethan's height. Thank you for teaching me how to really play. Ethan smiled and hugged his father for the first time in 8 years of life. At 9 years old, Ethan had become a completely different child from the one Andrew had known in his early years. He spoke in short but clear sentences, participated in regular youth tournaments, and had developed a balanced routine of homeschooling, therapies, and, of course, ping pong. Chloe had suggested it was time for Ethan to experience a school environment. He needs broader social interaction, she explained to Andrew. Ping pong opened doors, but school can open windows. Andrew was resistant. Homeschooling worked perfectly. Ethan learned at his own pace, without pressure, without judgment. Why risk it? Because he's ready for more challenges, Chloe insisted. And because he deserves the chance to discover what else he's capable of. After much research, they found Vanguard Academy, which claimed to be inclusive and specialized in children with special needs. The principal, Principal Miller, received them with enthusiasm. We have experience with autism, she assured. Our methods are proven. Ethan started school in February. The first few days were difficult, but he gradually adapted. He made friends with Leo, a quiet boy who also liked concentration games. Things seemed to be working, until March arrived. Andrew received a call from the school on a Thursday afternoon. Mr. Vance, you need to come pick up Ethan. There was an incident. Andrew arrived at the school and found Ethan sitting in the principal's office, visibly agitated, rocking back and forth. What happened? Ethan had a meltdown in gym class, Ms. Jenkins, the PE teacher, explained. When the children started playing dodgeball, he threw himself on the floor and started screaming. We had to remove him from the gym. Andrew knelt down to Ethan's height. Son, what happened? Noise, Ethan murmured. Too much noise. Ball too fast. Andrew understood immediately. Dodgeball was chaotic, unpredictable. Nothing like the controlled rhythm of ping pong. Mr. Vance, Principal Miller intervened. Our psychologist, Dr. Anya Sharma, evaluated Ethan and has some recommendations. Dr. Sharma was a middle-aged woman with a gaze that tried to be gentle but sounded condescending. Ethan is a sweet child, but clearly not ready for group activities. I recommend he continue homeschooling for a few more years. He was adapting well, Andrew protested. It was just one episode. Mr. Vance, autistic children have limitations. Forcing situations beyond their capacity can be harmful. Ethan would be happier in a controlled environment. Andrew felt anger swell in his chest. Limitations? My son participates in ping pong tournaments, communicates perfectly, has friends. That's different. Dr. Sharma cut in. Ping pong is a structured, predictable activity. School requires adaptability that Ethan simply doesn't possess. Doesn't possess, or you don't know how to develop it? The silence that followed was tense. Mr. Vance, the principal tried to mediate. Perhaps it would be better for everyone if Ethan returned to homeschooling. We can provide references for specialized schools. Specialized schools? Andrew stood up. You market yourselves as inclusive, but at the first difficulty you want to exclude my son? It's not exclusion, Dr. Sharma said. It's realism. Ethan has a condition that limits his possibilities for full social integration. Andrew looked at Ethan, who was silently observing the conversation. In the boy's eyes, he saw something that broke his heart. Resignation, as if he were used to being considered limited. Ethan, Andrew said, ignoring the adults in the room. Do you want to stay in school? Ethan hesitated. Like Leo, like learning, don't like noise. What if the school found a way for you to participate without so much noise? Can you? Andrew turned to the principal. Can you? Mr. Vance, we cannot modify our curriculum for one student. I'm not asking you to modify the curriculum. I'm asking you to use the creativity you claim to have with inclusion. The tension in the room was palpable. What if Ethan didn't play dodgeball but helped the teacher with other tasks during gym? What if instead of trying to fit him into activities that overwhelm him, you discovered what activities stimulate him? That would be irregular, the principal murmured. Irregular or truly inclusive? Andrew took Ethan's hand. Let's go home, son. Tomorrow I'll come back to talk to people who really understand what inclusive education means. As they left the room, Ethan tugged on his father's sleeve. Dad, do they think I'm broken? Andrew stopped in the hallway and knelt down again. Son, you are not broken. You are different. And different isn't a defect, it's a gift. Some people just need to learn to see that. What if they don't learn? Andrew smiled, feeling a determination he hadn't felt in years. Then Daddy will teach them. Andrew spent the next week researching schools and gathering documents about the rights of children with special needs. He was determined to find a place where Ethan could grow without being limited by prejudices disguised as care. But Ethan seemed to have other priorities. Dad, there's a regional championship next month, he said during dinner. Can I participate? Andrew stopped eating. Ethan had never shown interest in larger competitions. Local youth tournaments were one thing, but a regional championship meant more experienced opponents, more pressure, more people watching. Are you sure? It will be different from the tournaments you've played in. Want to try? Chloe smiled from the other side of the table. I think he's ready. The last few months have shown that Ethan can handle greater challenges than we imagined. Preparation for the championship became a family mission. Andrew canceled business trips to train with Ethan in the afternoons. Chloe researched concentration techniques and methods for dealing with pre-competition anxiety. Even Martha, who had initially resisted the changes, began to ask about their training progress. Ethan evolved quickly. His motor coordination, always good, refined each day. More importantly, he developed his own strategies. He observed opponents, identified patterns, adapted his game. He plays like he thinks, Chloe commented to Andrew. Logical, methodical, but with instinct. The regional championship took place in a large gymnasium in the state capital. When they arrived, Andrew felt his stomach churn. Hundreds of people, dozens of tables, constant noise of balls and cheering. It's a lot, he murmured to Chloe. For you or for him? She replied, pointing to Ethan. The boy was standing at the entrance, observing everything with curiosity instead of anxiety. He seemed to be cataloging the sounds, identifying patterns in the apparent chaos. Can I see the tables? He asked. They walked through the gym. Ethan observed different playing styles, types of paddles, serving techniques. He didn't seem intimidated. He seemed to be studying. The first match was against a boy 2 years older, Caleb, who had already won state tournaments. Andrew held his breath as Ethan positioned himself at the table. The first set was difficult. Caleb played aggressively, with power. Ethan lost 11-6, but during the break, instead of getting down, he approached Andrew. "He always plays the same," he said. "Strong, but always in the same place." In the second set, Ethan changed his strategy. He stopped trying to match Caleb's power and began to explore the corners of the table, varying the rhythm. Caleb, accustomed to intimidating opponents with power, didn't know how to react to Ethan's cerebral play. Ethan won the second set 11-8. The third set was a masterclass. Ethan had completely deciphered Caleb's pattern. Every shot was calculated. Every return had purpose. He won 11-4. The crowd, which initially cheered for the favorite Caleb, began to applaud Ethan's points. There was something hypnotic about his play, precise, intelligent, almost mathematical. Andrew was crying when Ethan returned to him after the victory. "He always played the same," Ethan repeated, as if it were the simplest explanation in the world. Subsequent matches followed a similar pattern. Ethan studied, adapted, won. Not with spectacular strength or speed, but with pure intelligence applied to the game. In the final, he faced Riley, a 12-year-old girl considered a state table tennis prodigy. She had impeccable technique, experience in national competitions, equipment sponsorship. "She's very good," Andrew murmured to Chloe as they watched Riley warm up. "He is too," Chloe replied simply. The match lasted an hour. Riley won the first set easily. Ethan won the second after studying her game. The third set was an epic battle. Every point contested, every return calculated. On the final point, Riley served powerfully, but the ball hit the net and died on her side. Point for Ethan, 11-9. Ethan had won the regional championship. During the awards ceremony, a local reporter approached for an interview. "Ethan, what's the secret to your game?" Ethan thought for a moment. "My caregiver taught me how to play before everyone tried to fix me." The phrase echoed through the gymnasium. Parents of other children looked at Chloe with curiosity. There was something there they didn't understand but wanted to learn. After the awards, 3 families approached Andrew and Chloe. "Do you give lessons?" a mother asked. "My son also has autism, but he's never been able to get interested in sports." Andrew looked at Chloe, who seemed surprised by the attention. "I'm not a therapist," she began. "You didn't cure Ethan," Andrew interrupted, remembering his own words from years ago. "You saw him. That's worth more than any diploma." That night in the car on the way home, Ethan held his trophy and watched the movement of the city lights. "Dad, can I keep playing?" "Always, son. Always." In the weeks following the championship, Andrew's house became a point of pilgrimage. Families arrived with shy children, children who avoided eye contact, young people who seemed to carry the weight of labels they hadn't asked for. Chloe was uncomfortable with the attention. "They think I have some magic formula," she told Andrew one afternoon, after the 5th family of the week had left. "I don't. Just pay attention to the children." "Perhaps that's exactly what they need to learn," Andrew replied. The house didn't have the structure to accommodate so many people. The shed, which was perfect for Ethan, became cramped with several children. Some adapted to ping pong immediately, others preferred to just observe. Some discovered interest in other activities Chloe improvised. "We need a bigger space," Andrew said one night, watching Chloe organize equipment scattered around the house. "Mr. Vance, I don't know if I'm ready for something bigger. I'm not a therapist. I don't have training." "Chloe," Andrew sat beside her, "you transformed my son. Not with techniques or theories, but with something no college teaches. You saw him as a person before you saw him as a diagnosis." Chloe smiled sadly. "What if I fail with other children? What if what worked with Ethan doesn't work with them? Then we adapt. We learn. We try again." Andrew had been thinking about this for weeks. He had resources, he had space, he had a desire to do something bigger. More importantly, he had seen the impact a different approach could have. "What if we created a project," he suggested. "A space where children can be themselves while discovering their abilities. What would it be like?" "I don't know. You tell me. What would work?" Chloe was silent for a long moment. It would have to be different from anything that already exists, she finally said. Not therapy, not classes. Just space to discover. Space to play before trying to fix? Exactly. In the following months, Andrew sold one of his commercial properties and bought a warehouse in the same neighborhood where Chloe lived. It was large enough for various activities, but in an environment that wouldn't intimidate lower-income families. Chloe didn't work alone. Andrew hired Ashley, a young physical educator who understood that movement was language, and Kevin, an occupational therapist who believed more in observing than in intervening. The rule is simple, Chloe explained to the team on the first day. We observe first, understand later, act only when necessary. Ethan became a kind of ambassador for the project. He showed new children how to hold the paddle, how to follow the ball, how not to get frustrated when they missed. His patience with younger children was infinite. One day, Andrew found Ethan teaching a 5-year-old girl named Lily who had Down syndrome. Like this, Lily, Ethan said, demonstrating the movement. The ball wants to play with you. You just need to play back. Andrew hid behind a column and watched. Ethan had become a natural teacher, translating for other children the language Chloe had taught him. Proud? Chloe appeared beside him. More than I ever imagined possible. He asked me something yesterday you need to know. What? He wants you to play ping pong with him in the next national championship. Not competing, you two together, in an exhibition. Andrew felt his eyes well up. He said that? He said he wants to show everyone that father and son can really play together. That night, Andrew found Ethan in the backyard, playing alone against the wall. Son, Chloe told me about your idea for the national championship. Ethan stopped playing. You want to? More than anything in the world. Ethan smiled and threw the ball to Andrew. Then let's train. We have a lot to learn from each other. The national championship took place in the nation's largest table tennis arena. Ethan, now 11 years old, had qualified among the top 8 youth players in the country. But for him, the most important thing wasn't the individual competition. It was the exhibition he would do with his father. Andrew was more nervous than Ethan. In the weeks of practice, he had realized that playing with his son was completely different from playing against opponents. It wasn't about winning. It was about creating something beautiful together. Remember the first rule Eleanor taught me? Andrew said to Ethan as they warmed up. Ping pong isn't about winning. It's about keeping the conversation going. And what will our conversation be about? Ethan asked. Andrew smiled. About how a father learned to listen to his son. Chloe watched from the stands along with the families from the ball house. 15 children had come to cheer, each carrying a ping pong ball as a good luck charm. The exhibition was announced as Father and Son, a Story of Connection. The announcer briefly explained Ethan's journey, but the words didn't capture the magnitude of the transformation that had occurred. Andrew and Ethan entered the central court. 3,000 people watched them, but father and son only saw each other and the table between them. Ready? Andrew asked. Always have been, Ethan replied. They started slowly. Andrew hit softly. Ethan returned with precision. There was no rush, no pressure. It was just a conversation between two hearts that had learned to speak the same language. Gradually, the pace increased. Ethan began to explore more complex shots, and Andrew followed as if he could read his son's mind. When Ethan sped up, Andrew sped up. When Ethan varied the rhythm, Andrew adapted. The audience was mesmerized. It wasn't a competition. It was a dance. Father and son moved in perfect harmony, each anticipating the other's movements. In a magical moment, Ethan did something that surprised even Andrew. He hit the ball in such a way that it went over the net, bounced on Andrew's side, and returned to his own paddle. It was technically impossible for Andrew to return it, but instead of trying, Andrew simply smiled and began to applaud his son. The audience erupted in applause. Ethan had won not just technically, but artistically. He had created a moment of pure beauty. Father and son met in the middle of the table. Andrew knelt and hugged Ethan, who whispered something in his father's ear that only he could hear. Thank you for learning to play with me, Dad. In the individual competition that followed, Ethan reached the national final. He faced Logan, a 13-year-old boy considered the future of American table tennis. The match was epic. Ethan won the first 2 sets using his characteristic tactical intelligence. Logan reacted and won the third and fourth sets with pure power and speed. In the final set, with the score tied at 10-10, something unexpected happened. Logan served with full force, but the ball hit the net and died on his side. Point for Ethan. Ethan had become national youth champion, but when he went to receive the trophy, he did something no one expected. He took the microphone and looked at the audience. "I want to thank 3 people," he said with a steady voice. "My dad, who learned that being different isn't being broken. Chloe, who taught me that playing is more important than fixing. And my mom, Eleanor, who left this table so Dad and I could learn to talk." There wasn't a dry eye in the audience. After the awards, a national TV reporter approached Andrew. "Mr. Vance, what was the secret to Ethan's transformation?" Andrew looked at Chloe, who was surrounded by families wanting to know more about the ball house. He looked at Ethan, who was teaching other children how to hold the paddle. He looked at the ball still bouncing on the table. "There was no secret," he said finally. "There was love. There was patience. And there was someone who believed my son didn't need to be fixed, just understood." That night, back at the ball house, families gathered for an impromptu party. Children played ping pong. Parents talked about similar journeys. Teenagers discovered they weren't alone in their differences. Andrew found Ethan in the backyard, watching the stars. "What are you thinking about, champ?" "How the ball connects everything," Ethan replied. "It bounces between me and you, between me and other kids, between different families. It's like an invisible thread connecting all of us." Andrew sat beside his son. "Your mom would say you're right. She always believed that play connects people in ways words can't." "Dad? Yes? Do you think she's proud of us?" Andrew looked at the stars too. "I'm sure she is. Especially because we learned to really play together." Ethan smiled and took a ball from his pocket. "One more game before bed?" "Always, son. Always." As father and son walked back to the house, Chloe watched from the ball house window. 3 years ago, she was just a young woman looking for work. Today, she had helped create a movement that showed the world that differences are not flaws to be corrected, but gifts to be celebrated. The ball kept bouncing, connecting hearts, building bridges, and proving that sometimes the deepest transformation happens not when we try to change someone, but when we allow ourselves to be changed by them. The ball house grew. The project spread to other cities. Hundreds of families learned that love isn't about molding children into preconceived images, but about discovering who they truly are and celebrating that discovery. And it all started with a ball, a table stored in a shed, and a young woman who believed that playing was more important than fixing.